No way, Jose.
The following footage proves beyond any doubt that the tanks intentionally set the house on fire. It proves that the Branch Davidians were murdered. You can see that this tank has a gas jet on the front that shoots fire. You can also see the fire quite plainly. The tank goes into the house twice, and each time as it backs out, the fire at the gas jet is plainly visible.
We must all do more to recognize and look for the early warning signals that deeply troubled young people send.
Hey guys, it's Jose Galison. You're watching No Way Jose. You can find us on the No Way Jose YouTube channel, all the major audio podcatchers, and Rumble as well. As you guys can see, I have a nice clean shave today. Someone told me on Already Dead I looked like Wolverine with Down syndrome. Actually, I think I can pull off the Wolverine look pretty good. I like chops. My wife doesn't, so I never bring them on. But with that, I do want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by NWJ Shave Co. Big Shave's been psyoping the American people for decades with their multi-blade razor scam. Get rid of that razor burn, irritation, and ingrown hairs caused by that multi-blade crap. Go back to traditional shave. You don't need expensive nonsense. NWJ will give you those single stainless steel blades just like your grandpa used to use. High quality stuff. You can look at that picture. Look at that thing. The thing's dope. One of these days I'll have to bring it out here and show you guys. It is pretty sick. It's a sleek piece of machinery, and yeah, it's definitely worth it. One traditional safety razor and a box of 100 stainless steel razor blades is what you'll get for $75. That'll cover you for basically the whole year, probably longer, honestly, depending on how frequently you shave. But if you're one of those people who shave regularly every single day, you can sign up for the Quarter Shave Club. That's about 25 cents a shave. Take down Big Shave and visit NWJShaveCo.com to get yourself their traditional safety razor. Use Jose for 10% off your entire order. NWJShaveCo.com. That's the place. By the way, I did have someone who said the code didn't work. We fixed that. So yeah, definitely go over there, support them because they support me, and vice versa. But yeah, with that, guys, we're going to continue our series on Watergate today. Let's bring in Austin and get into it. What's up, bud?
What's up, brother?
What it do?
I don't know.
Oh, yeah. By the way, also a little disclaimer for those who watch video. Yeah, I have my glasses on. I don't normally do that. It's my big ones. I feel like it looks even worse now that I have shaved because now I have to look at a small little... It makes my chin even smaller. Although I don't have a small chin, I have a huge fucking chin. But yeah, I don't know. Just I feel goofy every time I shave it off. It's like, as soon as my beard gets long, I'm like, it looks gross. And then I shave it, and I'm like, fucking hate it. What did I do?
Right. Dude, last time I shaved completely, I was like, mistake. I got to keep something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But no, I got to keep it clean, though. I got to keep some lines going. Honestly, I need to get hooked up with some new NWJ Shave Co.
It's smooth though, but it's like baby smooth. I keep finding myself touching it. It's so soft. Well, we're gonna get into it today. Oh yeah, I was saying I ran out of saline, guys. So I don't have the glasses. So that's why I don't look so as cute for you guys today. I ran out of saline, forgot to pick some up for my contacts. So here we are with my Jeffrey Dahmer glasses. So. Yeah, but yeah, it is what it is. But yeah, we're getting back into Watergate. For those audio listeners, you don't have to look at my goofy face. You get my goofy voice instead. But yeah, we're back in Watergate. We're gonna recap some stuff, not a whole lot, because what the hell are you doing jumping in the middle of a series? I would assume you probably either just watched the last one or recently did. for those out there. But I think we left off at Project Gemstone is where we were at. So that'd probably be the best place to kind of jump into the story, a little bit of a hard
Definitely.
intro into it. But hey, you should have just watched the last episode and we kind of covered it. But I guess you can give a kind of a little bit of a recap, maybe kind of cover a little bit of the ground from last week, just to kind of jog people's memory, because I don't think a lot of people know what the fuck Operation Gemstone is. So
Right.
just kind of jog their memory.
Okay, so it's G. Gordon Liddy is the one who's kind of it's attributed to as his brainchild, sort of. And he was the finance counsel for the committee to reelect the president, the CRP at the time for Nixon, and so he's ex FBI, G. Gordon Liddy, and he's kind of like he was one of the only members involved with the burglary at the Watergate who wasn't CIA Bay of Pigs, right? As far as the connection there. So that to me plays a significant part in kind of his role and how it plays out. And yeah, it's a very interesting story because G. Gordon Liddy basically came to the former aide, John Ehrlichman, and presented a campaign intelligence plan to CRP's acting chairman, Jeb Magruder, right? And also Attorney General John Mitchell. And so at that point, when he's pitching this plan, it it it's like such a broad spectrum plan. Like yes, it involves wiretapping and burglaries of some diplomatic offices and things of that nature. Like I mean that, and keep in mind that one of the first things that they were doing, other than because you have to understand that the White House Plumbers Unit that was a part of this basically it was created out of the CRP in the White House in order to stop press leaks from happening from inside the administration, from within inside. And so it pretty much was a
Oh, I get it. Plumber leaks. Sorry, go on.
exactly.
It just
It
clicked.
right. And
I always thought plumbers like, oh, this is supposed to be this like incognito, like, oh, we're plumbers,
right.
but we're secretly CIA men, kind of like
Exactly,
a
man.
stupid
Yep.
cover, like a play on words. But now I get it. I'm retarded.
Ridiculous.
Go on.
Yep. And they played into it like very seriously. They even like put up a sign in their own office, and it was basically I think someone's parent had brought it up, or someone's significant other, when they went home, and it's a weird story how they claim it they came up with that name. But anyway, yeah, so they created this unit. It was basically an investigative unit within the CRP in order to plug these press leaks. And it's so ridiculous to me that the first thing that happens is the CIA infiltrates that group, right? And so to set the stage for this, we should first at least detail what Gemstone was. So it was first outlined by Liddy in two separate meetings with three other individuals. Then Attorney General John Mitchell, like I said, White House counsel John Dean, and Jeb Magruder, an ally and former aide to H.R. Haldeman, as well as the temporary head of the CRP. And so man, that was because it was pending Mitchell's resignation as Attorney General. And so the first meeting occurred in the Attorney General's office in Washington, D.C. And Liddy described in great detail his plan to disrupt the upcoming DNC in Florida and his plan to prevent any disruption of the upcoming RNC, which was scheduled to take place in California. And so Liddy's proposals legitimately would cost over $1 million at this time, right? And that's significant. You know what I mean? Like it's a broad spectrum plan. Like it's not, in my opinion, clearly not. They didn't allegedly they didn't even mention the Watergate once in these meetings. So it clearly wasn't a top priority of any kind. And like I said before, I'm not sure if I mentioned it in part one, but Nixon was polling at 70%. They didn't even have a candidate in the DNC yet, selected. And so McGovern was the only one that was a potential candidate. And guess what? One of their initial plans, what at least some of the individuals who weren't read in on this secret agenda that we will discuss, it seemed like they were basically operating like, you know, initially thought, according to their role within the CRP and the plumbers unit, which was just to plug the leaks and also to help, bolster the reelection campaign, bolster the reelection campaign of Nixon. So it's like, at this point, we have to keep all of that in mind, right? Because it seems like Liddy was unaware, although he is unaware of like additional factors as to why they were burglarizing the DNC Watergate complex. We'll get into that. But what's important is that you had all these various elements of that involved with Gemstone, where you're talking about kidnappings of like political radicals and different leaders of different groups and all of this, and uh and they like legitimately were naming certain people and said that we should kidnap specific radical leaders who might cause trouble at the RNC and take them to Mexico. That was one of the that was one of the plans until the RNC was over, which is absolutely ridiculous. But according to everybody involved, I guess with some sarcasm from Attorney General Mitchell, apparently he was kind of like, like dragging his feet as far as, green lighting this plan. And by the way, I will say that a lot of people describe G. Gordon Liddy as kind of a psychopath, right? Like, and that he actually was so devoutly loyal to, you know, Nixon and the CIA, apparently, that he was like offering to just go stand on a corner when all of this blew up in the public eye, to go stand on a corner and wait to be executed by whichever entity wished him to be dead, right? Which I was just like, that's kind of strange, but anyway, so a lot of people describe him as kind of a weird, strange person who is pretty radical, and would basically greenlight, like, for example, Howard Hunt set up a meeting with this CIA poisons expert, okay, and he set up this meeting on the record, and to me, this is Howard Hunt acting on behalf of the CIA, because in reality, what I think he was doing was kind of setting Liddy up to one, have something they could point to, and evidentiary wise, to point to as evidence as far as White House approval for some of these operations, including even talking to a CIA poisons expert and having a conversation about assassinating Jack Anderson, the columnist, right? And so who's shedding all this light on foreign policy with Pakistan and India and all this shit happening at this time, and so Nixon's pissed. And again, remember, this is supposedly the plumbers unit, so it should fall within, kind of their jurisdiction, I guess, if you call it that. But and so, like, during that meeting, Hunt is the one who's like, all right, Liddy, he suggests to Liddy, give him $100, like, for this meeting or whatever. And so again, you have White House funds supplying, something that is clearly illegal, in the eyes of the public and legality wise. So it's just, I think that's something that we should remember. Like, things like that are worth mentioning, because to me, that adds more incriminating evidence and lends more credibility to this secret agenda taking place. Because once again, when we get into the burglaries, which start with the breaking into Dr. Fielding's office, the psychiatrist of Daniel Ellsberg, which, by the way, the White House Plumbers Unit was greenlit and created directly after the Pentagon Papers and the Ellsberg leaks. So it was a direct result of that. And by the way, on the tapes, you can hear Nixon long before Watergate happened, even before Ellsberg. You hear him. He knew Howard Hunt, and I know he did because of the Op 40 connection and how heavily involved he was with the individuals that were entirely a part of the JFK assassination, right? And so these people knew each other, in certain ways. And so I found it pretty fascinating that Nixon himself mentions Howard Hunt on the tapes months before all of this ever happens, as being when he's like kind of like he's all pissed off, ranting, talking about how we might as well just bomb the Brookings Institute. And fucking he's like, Howard Hunt should be the guy we get for that job. He said Hunt is the guy we should get for that job. And I just thought, what the hell? Like that is extraordinary as far as how this all inevitably plays out, right? So anyway, to finish out the more important details of Gemstone is that
Which, for context, those who forget, Hunt was seems like the point man for the robbery stuff. So
right, well, he's legitimately listed as the one of two burglary supervisors who, along with G. Gordon Liddy, right? Who's stringing along this whole time, man. And when they break into Dr. Fielding's office, what the hell does Howard Hunt do to G. Gordon Liddy? First of all, they don't get shit when they're in Dr. Fielding's office. All they did, they found Ellsberg's file, they pulled out the paperwork, and then they just took pictures of it. They just took snapshots of it, and it's so ridiculous to me because they thought they had failed. They thought the op was fucked. They thought, okay, well, we clearly didn't get what we were supposed to, and so, but meanwhile, out in the parking lot, while the Cubans are rifling through Ellsberg's file, fucking G. Gordon Liddy and Howard Hunt, no, it wasn't the same night that they broke in, actually, that this happened, because they had went to scope it out, right? They were actually going to check the facility, and so Hunt went with Liddy, and when they went to actually vet the facility for the planning of the operations, Howard Hunt had G. Gordon Liddy stand in front of Dr. Fielding's parking placard in his parking spot in the parking lot and took his picture, which would then be used later on to implicate the White House in green lighting the burglary of Ellsberg's office, right? Or the break-in. And so it's just, to me, that seems like, you're covering. There's no other reason, operational wise, to take that picture. It's an incriminating picture that would only serve a purpose for the agency, right? Especially how this all inevitably turns out. So yeah,
it's not the only sloppy thing they did too, but we'll
oh
get to
no
that.
yeah, it's ridiculous. And Dr. Fielding's office was the one that when they broke in, they had sent like two guys that was the time they were in disguises. They were posing as maintenance men and stuff, right? And yeah, it's a pretty extraordinary story on its own, but I love what Eugenio Martinez has to say about it all, because to him, he's in the dark. He's entirely in the dark, but he's so used to his he's been in many different operations. So this guy is a veteran, right? And he had known Howard Hunt since the Bay of Pigs days, and they had worked together many times. And so for him, he did not understand why all of these, just the sloppy aspect of it, like you said, like how the decisions they were making on the ground as far as a covert operational perspective is entirely flawed. Eugenio's like, he expected the operations to get called off multiple times, and then either McCord or Hunt would push it forward. And to me, again, that is a huge condemnation and something we should point to in regard to they were clearly working on behalf of a secret agenda. And in my opinion, it entirely connects back to the CIA. And I think we have enough tangible, evidence to lay that out. Right. So
Yeah. I mean, Eugenio was
anyway,
told to shut the fuck up in color on one point. So,
do what?
because Eugenio was told at one point to shut the
Oh
fuck
yeah.
up in color, like
Hmm.
just go along with it. Just
I know.
you're an operative. This is your job. Shut the fuck up.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, and then McCord, the first thing he said was like, "Everybody, keep your mouths shut. Don't say a word. Like, everything will be okay." And you know who provided the legal counsel? That not one of the burglars actually made one phone call. All right, when they were arrested, that their legal counsel was already taken care of. They expected this, it seems. And it looks like it was the Mullen and Company that Howard Hunt just so happened to work for, and that we now know on the record was incorporated by the CIA. And also, they were using Mullen and Company internationally. They used Mullen and Company to overthrow Allende in Chile and replace him with Pinochet, you know? And it's just like, there is no coincidence with any of that. I mean, Howard Hunt himself was involved with the overthrow of Allende in Chile. So it's like, and all of that, guess who's providing cover for CIA operatives in the field? Mullen and Company, the same company who provides the legal counsel for the Watergate burglars. That is just, at that point, you're just dumb. Like, what are you guys doing, man? You know, and and but again, with all the information and how it was also strategically withheld from the public. My God, man, I feel like Judge John Sirica himself was compromised by CIA at this time. I think his
Mm.
ultimate goal was to overthrow the Nixon administration. That I honestly do at this point. And
Yeah.
so anyway,
I mean,
getting
knowing
way
what we
ahead of
know
myself.
now, it's hard not to believe that the fix wasn't in on like all levels, like even
Yeah.
on in the trial. Because I
Yeah.
mean, I haven't really followed the specifics of the trial. I mean, maybe you've looked into them a little bit, but I mean, just the fact of like what kind of got out, and I guess you could say maybe this is a product of the media. Maybe there were damning things that came out in the trials, but it didn't seem like until later that really stuff started to come out. Like, oh shit.
Hmm.
Like it's not like all these people are CIA. This, that, this.
Yeah.
This would seem to be information that most people just didn't really know. So you would think that there was some sort of fix, whether that be media and slash or at the legal level. But
Right.
yeah, so I mean, it just at every level it seems like.
Right. And there were a bunch of ethical CIA operatives and officers who, by the way, bucked this. They were upset with how the CIA behaved during this time. They believed it to be illegal, unconstitutional, and they organized after Helms was forced to resign. They organized and they went public with a lot of this stuff. And it's mainly the reason we have any of this on the record is because that was the case. And we had some truly moral, individuals within the agency itself who couldn't stand idly by and watch such unconstitutional measures take place domestically and undermining individual sovereignty in this country. I mean, so to me, that is very important and also goes because that's when, by the way, it was already after the televised hearings, and so it's like it's not going to be publicly as far as in public awareness and at the forefront of their consciousness. Like it's just not going to happen, and that was by design, in my opinion. And when you really consider, like, Helms immediately ordered all these files destroyed when the church committee hearings were set, and so it's like he ordered thousands of files to be destroyed.
Mm,
I
yeah,
mean,
I
how
think
much were in those files? Like,
yeah, they'll
to
do
me,
that.
it's
They'll
yeah.
do that. I think God, what was it? The newest drop, I forget. I always mess up. Was it Kanakoa or not Kanakoa? Kakoa or some shit that I don't know if you followed that thing. I know Radix has been covering it a lot.
I haven't
There's
seen it.
another researcher named Ford Fisher was like kind of the guy who started this, there was a militia where some dude did a bunch of fishy stuff. People go check out Radic Verum's page. I'm going to do an awful job. But there's been kind of ongoing stuff. Like, essentially, this is a guy the militia essentially outed because he was doing super duper fetty stuff. And then, like, this dude tried to fake his own death and all sorts of craziness in the most sloppy ways. And now there's, like, legal stuff going on. And I believe the newest thing is that they, like, sealed some stuff about like Intel type stuff. So I'm like, that is how that works. If there's anything Intel related, it's like, yeah, that's not going to be discussed in any sort of trial. It's like, I mean, I don't know. There's like, in a certain sense, though, it's like, yo, that like kind of fucks up the whole thing. Like, that's like, what we're like, you're telling me a crime's happening here and it's clearly Intel related, but then you're going to be like, oh, we can't talk about any of this. So it's like, okay, like, well, then what the fuck are we talking about here? So, yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So that, I mean, basically that outlines that Gemstone was just this massive multi-million-dollar plan that G. Gordon Liddy outlined to these, White House, individuals within the White House, like Attorney General John Mitchell, like I said, and like White House counsel John Dean. And so, yeah, that set the stage for kind of the reason, what gave them, the kind of operational green light to go forward with different projects like this, like burglarizing the DNC, right? Which was, the narrative was that they had wiretapped Larry O'Brien, right? Who was head of the DNC and all of this, but they had no like info, like intel at all on like a political campaign or anything of that nature. So it couldn't have actually been. And by the way, it turns out that it wasn't even his desk or his phone that was bugged. It was Spencer Oliver Jr., who's like not even affiliated with the DNC, right? As far as like, it's just absolutely ridiculous how the narrative was trotted out. But anyway, so
real quick, real quick. Sorry, I didn't mean to fuck you up.
No, you're good.
I just found it while we were talking. It's Russell Vane the Fourth was the name of this essentially alleged Fed. And in this case, a protective order has been filed in the case, which restricts, among other things, public access to records or other information regarding confidential sources or undercover law enforcement agents. Yeah. Which sounds like that's what this guy fucking was. So
exactly, bro.
Or I mean, I guess, yeah, or agents. Yeah, so he would probably be the latter one as opposed to being like a confidential source. So yeah, I don't know. It's kind of like, oh, so what are we even going to talk about here? Sorry, go on. Yeah.
So my main point is that I just didn't understand how instrumental, right, that the CIA had been in the preparation for Gemstone. Okay, because it's labeled, like I said, Gemstone is G. Gordon Liddy's brainchild, right? Now, it doesn't seem like that is entirely the case. Like, now he is definitely on board, and like I said, he's the kind of guy that you could just manipulate into having a conversation about poisoning Jack Anderson, right? Like, so who would actually entertain that and potentially go through with something like that, which they said that was in the cards at this time, and that the only reason it didn't happen is because they were inevitably arrested because of Watergate. And so it's possible that they were planning on assassinating a journalist, right? Which we know they were planning it, but it's
they would
yeah, I know, right? Oh man, brother. But so they're covertly facilitating Gemstone, all right? And we know this now, all right? Because they're doing it through E. Howard Hunt, all right? And H.R. Haldeman, White House Chief of Staff to Nixon, would later write in 1978 that the Mullen Company was in fact a CIA front company, even incorporated by the agency, a fact that was apparently unknown to Haldeman while he worked in the White House. But apparently through CIA project Q-Conchant, which I was unaware of this, but it was a project used to provide security approvals on non-agency personnel and facilities. And Hunt conveniently obtained a covert security approval to handle the firm's affairs, Mullen and Company, during Robert Mullen's absence from Washington, D.C. So while serving as vice president of Brown University's club in Washington, in D.C., Howard Hunt befriended and commenced a strong association with organization's president, former congressional aide Charles Colson, who's the one who actually hired him into the White House. And he was working on Richard Nixon's CRP campaign.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just so ridiculous to me. But so
I think Coulson has a history too, if I recall. I don't remember. That name sounds familiar. Maybe
well,
there's another Coulson.
there's another Coulson for sure.
Yeah.
I'm not now. I don't think this is the same Coulson though, because I know he came up in Ruby Ridge. He came up in PatCon quite
Wasn't that
often.
the one that's like literally like Phil Coulson or some shit? Because I always thought that was weird. Because I just thought it was, maybe I'm wrong that it's Phil, but I just always remember, because for those who aren't aware, like if you watch the Marvel Universe, that's like the main Shield guy, like the one who dies in like the first movie, but then like there's a whole TV show later where he's alive and blah blah. But the point being, it's kind of like, I know there's a recent episode on fucking, was it Tinfoil Hat, where they were kind of talking about, I think it was just like a 606 or 777th episode, I think. So they were talking a lot about like the numerology there, but they did bring up the point of like how sometimes it almost seems like the powers that be sometimes hide things by, for example, to kind of get what I'm getting, another example of what I'm saying is like Operation Monarch or Project Monarch or whatever it was. Now, anyone who watched the Godzilla movies knows that like Monarch is the name of the big organization, and they made a whole show too. So chances are, if you go to Google, type in Monarch, that'll probably be the first thing that pops up.
Bro, we should bring that on when Sam comes on already dead, because he's such a fan of Godzilla.
Yeah, I like
that. Would
Godzilla
be perfect, dude. Yeah. But
yeah, no, it makes so my point being is, I don't know if the guy is Phil Coulson, but I just always, maybe it's something Coulson. It was something similar, and I always thought it was weird.
Yeah, I can't remember his first name now.
Yeah, he had some fishy connections, and it's like, oh, now you made some semi-major, pop culture guy character this, and now you're like, oh, that's what people think of, as opposed to that. So not that they were thinking about it in the first place, but you're just burying it even more. So
exactly, man. Yeah,
but
that's a good point. No, you're good.
Mm-hmm.
So by 1971. Coulson, largely considered as Nixon's hatchet man, he was then director of Nixon's Office of Public Liaison and hired Hunt, where he joined the White House Special Investigations Unit, otherwise known as the White House Plumbers. And they even claimed that it was specialized in political sabotage. I mean, that's the official narrative. But so in that coming year, the CIA would utilize essentially every department resource available within the agency itself to covertly assist Howard Hunt in his duties within the White House Plumbers Unit. All right. Not only had Hunt relied on Richard Helms to leverage the Mullen Company into hiring him, he subsequently used the CIA Employment Assistance Department to recruit retired CIA personnel like the Cubans and Frank Sturgis to assist in his clandestine operation. He even retained the CIA's graphics department to prepare the gemstone charts for G. Gordon Liddy, as he used all different departments within the agency to acquire various operational tools, such as weapons and disguises and surveillance equipment, false identifications, access to designated safe houses, and medical evaluations even. It's just ridiculous to me that this hasn't been told more often, because even in a lot of the different Watergate, even in podcasts that I listen to, and it's just like, they don't seem to take it in that direction. They will cover that Hunt was potentially CIA, but they don't really dig much deeper than that. And to me, it is out there, and it's pretty. I just can't see another way around it as far as making any sort of argument that isn't entirely the case, right? So anyway, so the CIA, they're seeking presidential authorization for domestic operations because, like I said, the FBI had called it off. No more black bag operations. And so I think this is one of the most important factors, because it didn't work and so they basically had no other option than to infiltrate the White House, right? And that's what it seems like. And so they had this plan, like, all right, we're going to lean on certain people who we can rely on to prop up some sort of, White House approval for domestic operations for the CIA. That was pretty much their goal, right? And so it was the Houston plan was what it was called. And it was effectively, it would undermine the Fourth Amendment. I mean, that's what it would do. And the illegal searches and seizures and all of that. And so Hoover had become increasingly frustrated with what he called the cowboyish ventures of the CIA. And he began halting all these black bag operations, which the Bureau had been carrying out on behalf of the CIA, routinely providing cover for domestic CIA operations. So, according to Mark Felt, right, who he's the former kind of number two guy who was passed over they after Hoover, and he was really Hoover's choice to replace him. But yeah, it's kind of, I feel like the CIA just didn't want a repeat of having to deal with J. Edgar Hoover. You know what I mean? Like, honestly, I think that the agency kind of won the day when Hoover left. And yeah, it does seem like the FBI now is almost working in lockstep with the CIA many, many times. It doesn't seem as if they're at odds as often as they once were. And I think that that's also really important. And, anyway, so Mark Felt, he's largely considered to be Deep Throat, which is a complete and total lie. It's a fabrication because
Quite the nickname to have.
You're right. And by the way, Woodward is the one that came up with that nickname. The infamous pornography called Deep Throat had already gone like viral in its day, right? And that's literally what he named his anonymous source off of, which I found insane. There's actual evidence of him like saying that was the reason that he named his source Deep Throat, which I was like, what is going on?
Yeah, and then if you like, I mean, for those to, I guess, kind of jump ahead a little bit, and not really to get into it, for those who know where this story kind of leads, it's almost like slapping you in the face, like kind of like,
no shit.
Oh, like almost like a haha, like in your face, like, like
It really is, dude. Like, that is such a great point because like knowing the outcome and oh my God, knowing the actual secret agenda, you're totally right, man. That is exactly what it is.
Yeah.
That is hilarious. Honestly, I didn't
don't
even put
bother
that
to say
together.
like, yep, I legitimately got it from the porn, like the porn,
Right.
the porn genre.
That is hilarious, man. Oh my God. So
Doesn't even try to make something up.
right. It's ridiculous, man.
Yeah.
So a former deputy director of the FBI and whistleblower Mark Felt, considered by many, like I said, to be the anonymous source, he claimed at his trial in 1980, which John O'Connor was his legal representative. He's pretty badass. He wrote I think he wrote a book called Postgate, I think was the name of it. But he seems like he's an honest person, at least, and meant well, and seemed to want to get to the bottom of the true narrative behind the lies. And so anyway, Mark Felt had claimed at his trial in 1980 that Hoover had forbidden those so-called black bag jobs for the entire Bureau, and that the reason for this halt was primarily the CIA's unreasonable demands on the FBI. Right? And so beyond halting the joint intelligence venture between FBI and CIA, Hoover ceased all formal communication with the agency over their refusal to tell Hoover the name of some FBI agent who had wrongly passed on information to the agency, which I think was William Sullivan, because you actually, like, William Sullivan, he makes up the compilation that was really what Deep Throat was a cover for, which was all of these CIA sources who had infiltrated the White House and the Nixon administration, and they were feeding Woodward, who was a military intelligence asset and literally was employed at the post like 2 months prior to Watergate, and then given the story, and it's just absolutely ridiculous, and and so once you realize all of that, it's just like, man, like Deep Throat was a compilation of many different people, and it was a cover, and it doesn't stand up,
I just want to point out a modern example right now, and I'm not even saying I know these people are Intel connected or whatever. I mean, it could just be they're that normie pilled or that lefty. But I know a while back, God, who's the guy? Oh, Trevor Aronson, and then I forget the other guy. There was another. It was like an article that was co-written by him and some other guy who's kind of released some big. He's kind of like the guy that, like, I don't know, whenever they do the big story, like of some sort of intrigue.
Right.
And this was
like the Woodward and Bernstein type. Is
Yeah,
that what
exactly.
you're saying?
There was what was it? It was recently. I mean, I just mentioned Radix a little bit ago. This ties back into her again. Her, God, why am I trying to have such a brain fart? The Fed napping shit, the fucking Whitmer Fed napping bullshit. They released an article after the fact, and not too long ago, kind of like going deep into all the stuff. And I mean, God, we may have covered it when we had Radix on the show, but it was very much like felt like a limited hangout, and it was kind of like it was very much they didn't really lean into at all how innocent these people were, and just kind of framed it more as like,
I know what you're
look how
talking about
crazy
now.
these feds are being, and kind of like, oh, they're just kind of getting a little out of hand, getting a little raucous out over there. Like, if anything, they almost trying to, like, it almost seemed like the spin was that, like, the informant was the issue. And for those who aren't aware, I mean, we've probably referenced, me and you, and I've definitely on my show many times, Trevor Aronson's Terror Factory book, which is a great book. But it does this thing, that book, it does this thing that if you're like a normie reading it, and you take it as like, fact, everything, the way he frames it and everything is fact, you'll come away from this with the perspective of, how would I put it? Because the whole point of that book is about like informants and stuff, but it's focused specifically on like war and terror is kind of, so it was focused a lot on like the Middle Easterners and how like a lot of those people were getting messed with to be informants, to inform this person, that person, how unreliable it was. But
Awolaki wasn't he like major part of that?
Yeah. The final chapter, it kind of kind of to wrap it up, is kind of like, oh, look how crazy this is, and like, look, they're using it to go after this terrorism or whatever, and it kind of frames it as, but we have this real problem at home. And then it's going into like domestic stuff, like kind of like white nationalist problem. I think it may even have made some quotes too about how like this is a rising problem, because that's been a common thing, like Obama and a lot of other people devoted reference to, is this being this is going to be the biggest problem facing America here, or it is the biggest problem. There have been multiple quotes where people say this is the biggest problem, it's for like me and you, we kind of roll our eyes at that, because you're like, okay, show me, and then you're like, oh, okay, well, oh, you're referring to this? Well, that was bullshit. You're referring to that? That was bullshit.
Exactly.
And so it's kind of like, no, like when I read Terror Factory, I'm like, oh, well, this is really good. You're making a lot of really good points. And I go, we shouldn't trust the feds. We shouldn't trust their informant system. The informant system is an unreliable system. And it's going to cause all sorts of problems. And I mean, I still find fault with the feds. It's almost like they hide behind it. I mean, sure, sometimes it's just accidental, and just the way that the incentives in place with informants is how that's going to work out. But also, they kind of, I think, use that to their advantage sometimes. So,
definitely.
That's how the takeaway I get. I see that as both like, no, this would equally apply both to your, domestic terrorism and, terrorism. As opposed to just being like, oh, we have this real problem that we should be, attacking. You're like, no, like, no, like, I'm going to apply this across the board. Like, that's just the reasonable thing. But anyways, I just kind of was pointing that out, that it does seem like that whenever you do have these like damning things, that these people come along with these limited hangout type things, and they get to be the ones that get to be the big breakers of the stories.
Oh, yeah.
And then they get to be, in the eyes of the public, like these, I don't know, these persevering heroes that release all this damning information. Like, this stuff was coming out anyways.
Right.
And so you got your guy on the story.
Oh, yeah. No, Woodward. He was there to deflect from. There were people within Nixon's administration and high-level officials who were really trying to defend themselves and honestly trying to. And I mean, you can hear on the tapes, they were like, which bastards did this shit? Like, why did they do this? You know, like they were very confused as to why they would break into the DNC. And, you know, beyond that, it's like, man, Woodward was sent there to one. What you have to realize is like the public perception of it all basically became that any CIA, any allegation of CIA involvement was Nixon's strategy to deflect from his own role in the break-in. That was literally how it was portrayed to the public. And that alone, that reigns supreme to this day as the official narrative. And it was all coming from the Post at this time from Woodward. And so for me, it was clearly to deflect from any CIA involvement, and that being the reason that he was even assigned at the Post in the first place at this time. And so, you know, come on, like the idea that Deep Throat was Mark Felt. Mark Felt was already gone from the administration when all the most, you know, important information, you know, was coming out. So it's like, that's a complete lie, right? That it was Mark Felt. He had already been, you know, passed over and forced to back out. And so it's just like, it feels like a manufactured cover for mainly Alexander Haig, which we'll get into, but also more than him, I think it applies to Carl Schaffler, one of the arresting officers. Yeah. Dual loyalty as a military intelligence agent. Yeah. And he seems to be highly involved with chaos, and it seems to have a lot of friends in the agency. And there's a reason he was there waiting for the call, right? Very interesting. But when you
the
see
guy that
that,
arrested them off the bat, like type deal.
Oh, yeah.
Is that where? Yeah. Okay.
yeah, he was sitting there in plain clothes with two other guys on his day off, waiting for the call. He was supposed to have been going to Pennsylvania for some birthday party, but then requested additional hours out of the blue, and just so happened to be sitting right outside the Watergate at 2:30 a.m. in the morning when the break-in occurred, getting the call.
He had a
I mean,
hunch.
come on now. Yeah, and he's like directly implicated as being and Robert Merritt was one of his sources, or one of his informants, and he wrote a book about this, and it's amazing. We'll get into that later, because Carl Schaffler, his story goes deeper than that. It's extraordinary what they were up to, and you know, they were utilizing these prostitution networks. I mean, it's a reality. And they were using military intelligence assets to infiltrate the Metropolitan Police Department in order to prop up these operations. Because in reality, they wanted to compromise and greenlight these operations as CIA blackmail, compromising, human compromise is what they call it, right? And that was the ultimate goal, you know. And so Carl Schaffler is also considered as one of the Deep Throat compilation, you know, characters, and I think William Sullivan is one of the other ones, and he was a major source for Woodward, as he was heavily involved. By the way, William Sullivan was COINTELPRO all day long. He's the guy who planted a bug under MLK's bed, and like, yeah, like that's William Sullivan, right? It's just so ridiculous, but he was the one feeding Woodward in March of '73, right? And so it was not Mark Felt, everyone. Like, it's just ridiculous. And so Mark Felt honestly wanted to get to the bottom of this. I mean, and so anyway, his attorney, John O'Connor, claims that Hoover's assistant director, William Sullivan, maintained close and supportive informal communication with CIA officials throughout this time. So in short, the CIA had lost its domestic operational capabilities, which had been routinely carried out for them by the FBI, and William Sullivan had many friends within the CIA and did not approve of Hoover's newly implemented restrictions. And so, in consultation with the CIA, he began positioning himself to both regain these operational capabilities for the agency while exploiting Hoover's reluctance to help the CIA as a means to overthrow Hoover and become director himself while using CIA and White House support. I mean, these are the games they play, right? Like, my God, ridiculous. And according
the
to
CIA could have the CIA and the FBI. Yeah.
yeah,
Overtly. Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
dude, it's so crazy. And according to O'Connor, Sullivan's first attempt to regain the capability for the CIA was to use the White House aide Tom Houston. All right. And so Sullivan proposed that Houston name an interagency group on intelligence to devise new capabilities for presidential approval. That's the setup, right? Like, this is how you infiltrate the White House. Like, and so the ultimate purpose was to provide a backdoor for the CIA to reacquire those domestic operational capabilities. And so what became known as the Houston Plan was this 43-page report and outline of proposed security operations. And it was put together by White House aide Tom Houston in 1970. And so the official line would have us believe that the impetus for this report was President Richard Nixon's desire for coordination of domestic intelligence on purported left-wing radicals and the counterculture era, anti-war movement in general, you know. But Houston had been assigned as White House liaison to the Interagency Committee on Intelligence, or ICI, a group chaired by then FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. But in reality, that was only a name, and truly Sullivan was the one running this. And so William Sullivan, Hoover's assistant, and drawing up the options right? So he's drawing up the options listed in what eventually became the document known as the Houston Plan. So it was literally created by Sullivan. And the plan called for domestic burglaries, illegal electronic surveillance, and opening the mail of domestic radicals. So at one time, it also called for camps in Western states where anti-war protesters would be detained. And I couldn't believe all the things with Chaos, brother. Like, reading through Operation Chaos, like, what the fuck? Like, that was CIA domestic operations all day long. And you can say, I mean, this was the plan to basically overcome their charter and the restrictions that they were under, and as far as domestic capabilities. But so anyway, by this time, like, you know, July 23rd, 1970, Nixon ratified the proposals, and they were submitted as a document to the directors of the FBI, Central Intelligence Agency, the DIA, and the National Security Agency. And the only one who objected to the plan was J. Edgar Hoover. Well, actually, he did gain the support of then Attorney General John Mitchell to pressure Nixon to rescind the plan. And so it was only greenlit for like 9 days until they convinced Nixon that this was a bad idea and that it would basically render the CIA, you know, completely, you know, just unrestricted. When, you know, the reins would just no longer could you rein in the agency. And so it was like Hoover himself saw that as you give them an inch, they take 10 miles, you know, like that's really how he felt. And so he was upset and he was talking about it. And that's why he ended up convincing John Mitchell to basically just get into Nixon's ear and try and explain to him what the consequences would ultimately be. And so anyway, despite the ultimate decision by Nixon, he revoked the plan, right? But several of its provisions were still implemented, right? So it's like they kind of still got to win. And so after the Houston plan, the FBI lowered the age of campus informants, thereby expanding surveillance of American college students, like in Chaos. And in 1971, the FBI reinstated its use of mail covers and continued to submit names to the CIA mail program. And as details of the Houston plan unfolded during the Watergate hearings, it came to be seen as part of what Attorney General Mitchell referred to as White House horrors. And this included the plumbers unit, the proposed firebombing of the Brookings Institution, the 1971 burglary of the office of the psychiatrist of Daniel Ellsberg, the creation of a White House enemies list, and the use of the IRS to punish those deemed to be enemies. So the Los Angeles Times reported that the Houston plan went public during the 73 Watergate hearings headed by Sam Ervin, right? And according to Senator Charles Mathias, U.S. President Richard Nixon rescinded the plan on July 28, 1970, after approving it only on July 23rd. So Mathias commented that many constitutional lawyers believed that for 5 days in 1970, the fundamental guarantees of the Bill of Rights were suspended by the mandate given the secret Houston plan, and that during the 5 days the plan was approved, authoritarian rule had superseded the Constitution. So, specifically, the authorization was to suspend the protections from the Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. And after Nixon's approval of the Houston plan, Hoover and Felt enlisted Attorney General John Mitchell, like I said, to influence Nixon to rescind it. And as of late 1970, once it was rescinded, officials within the CIA realized that the FBI was not going to cooperate, and their only hope had become to infiltrate the White House, right? So this is when the Moore Radford affair it really comes, in my opinion, it plays a major factor, because Alexander Haig had basically enabled this guy Radford to steal all these classified documents from the National Security Council. And this was the military spy ring that Nixon had unearthed leading up to this green light to create an independent intelligence operation within the White House. And so Nixon and his loyalists, they weren't entirely aware of the level of Haig's involvement in that scandal, right? People had a hunch, though. Nixon even said that he had a strange, assumption that Haig was involved. So I find it insane that he would hire him as, later on to replace Ehrlichman or the other one. I can't remember the other one's name right now. Haldeman. Yeah, Haldeman, that's the name. But yeah, anyway. But so it's definitely, this is kind of a, in my opinion, this is precedent setting, because he realized he's being spied upon. And in reality, it was because they didn't like what he was doing with his foreign policy, right? And so they called this like the Kissinger wiretaps from 69 to 71, right? Right before the plumbers unit, the Ellsberg leak, everything that happened leading up to Watergate. And so it just seems so like perfect with the timing. But anyway, so we have to really at least try and understand more Radford, because it was really involving all these members of the JCS, Joint Chiefs of Staff, and they were operating an espionage operation against Nixon from 70 to 71. And so yeah, Kissinger was like, he was so pissed that and so the Kissinger wiretaps were in operation from 69 to 71, like I said, and I think that alone is sort of it should be of primary concern, because they realized they had no one they could trust, and it seemed like, outside of kind of their own White House staff in a way, but even that they couldn't trust, it seemed, and so and that's why it seems like Um, all of these people are getting manipulated, and you see the loyalties, they become so strained immediately afterward. But throughout the Nixon presidency, right? Well, keep in mind, right? Like in November 1970, chairman of the JCS, Thomas Moorer, he expressed concerns regarding the foreign policy decisions of Nixon and Kissinger, primarily involving the war in Vietnam, the détente with the Soviet Union, and the attempts to begin opening trade with China. Just like I think we mentioned that last episode, is that was a huge reason that, you know, you had the intelligence apparatus kind of, they were at odds with the White House, and so fearing, like, and they claim that it was communist sympathies, right? But that's their excuse for everything they did at this time. They you know, literally Roy Cohn's like, it's okay that I'm running these little boys in this prostitution scandal because of communists. And it's like, brother,
We're trying to
no.
get the communists, man.
Yeah.
I don't really feel like Nixon was a big communist sympathizer.
No, man. That is so crazy. But so the president of his national security, as well, as far as the president and his national security advisor, Admiral Moore, organized a spy ring inside the White House, right? This was fearing communist sympathies from the president and his national security advisor, is what I mean. That Admiral Moore then decided to organize a spy ring inside the White House National Security Council office with the primary goal of obtaining classified documents to undermine the policies of Nixon's White House. So they immediately discovered this military spy ring after these leaks happen, and that's when Kissinger gets pissed, and they basically start spying on themselves. Like, it's hilarious, man. But so you have, I can't believe how much was happening during this time. But
yeah, it is astounding how the I don't know, the mythos behind the CIA is that they were essentially trying to go after communists, was their big thing, and they were trying to stop other foreign countries, you know, by doing coups or this or that, to you know, undermine the influence of communism. And then now we essentially have the same thing happening in our own country. With Nixon. And once again, this isn't to say I like Nixon necessarily. I mean, shit, in a certain sense, if you want to be in binary brain here in this story, you could almost look at Hoover as a good guy, but he's not a fucking good guy. He's a piece of shit too.
Total piece of shit, dude. Yeah. That's hilarious. Man, it's truly astounding to me. Like one, because when you hear on the tapes, like how he's trying to leverage Helms to shut down the investigation into him after Watergate, and Helms is coy, dude. Like, he knows what he's doing. He knows he's being recorded. He's well aware of the White House taping system, and it's just like, to me, you can tell, right, that he's trying to look like the good guy in this situation only by the way he reacts to Nixon, right? But in reality, Nixon's like trying to leverage the CIA to shut down the investigation right after the arrests and everything is happening, because he even, like, on the tapes, he tries to get them to help with the cover up, and he goes, "Who shot John? Who shot John?" He just keeps repeating to John Kennedy. Oh shit. I'm like, oh my God, brother. Like, I couldn't believe that he said that. And then you have him literally say on the tape, "We protected Helms from one hell of a lot of things." Nixon growled on the tape, "You open that scab, there's a hell of a lot of things. And we just feel that it would be very detrimental to have this thing go any further. This involves these Cubans, ex-CIA man and Watergate burglar Howard Hunt, and a lot of hanky-panky that we have nothing to do with ourselves." Nixon advised Chief of Staff Haldeman, H.R. Haldeman, on how to get the CIA director to kill the FBI's probe. And this is a quote. "Say, look, he's telling him what to say. Say, look, the problem is that this will open the whole Bay of Pigs thing, and the president just feels that, without going into the details, don't lie to them to the extent to say there is no involvement, but just say this is sort of a comedy of errors, bizarre, without getting into it. The president believes that it is going to open the whole Bay of Pigs thing up again. The June 23rd tape was incontrovertible evidence that Nixon had obstructed justice. The last vestige of support for Nixon on Capitol Hill evaporated. 2 weeks later, on August 74, Nixon resigned. But the smoking gun tape was not only the denouement of the Watergate affair, it was and is an unsettling glimpse into the dark heart of the Watergate scandal and the workings of American power in the mid-20th century. The commander-in-chief voiced ominous threats that reeked of unspoken crimes to his intelligence chief, whose agency had employed 4 of the 7 burglars. For the next 50 years, Nixon's entourage, JFK conspiracy theorists, journalists, and historians, this is Politico saying this, pondered the June 23rd tape as a Rosetta Stone of Nixon's psyche. What hanky-panky was Nixon referring to? What did he mean by the whole Bay of Pigs thing? What story was going to blow if the CIA didn't cooperate? A long overlooked White House tape provides the answers. The hanky-panky referred to CIA assassination operations in the early 1960s. The whole Bay of Pig thing was the agency's reaction to its most humiliating defeat. And the story that might blow was the connection between those events and the assassination of JFK. So Nixon and Helms.
Wait, how did they conclude that that's what hanky panky was? Because I hear hanky panky and I think the prostitution shit. Like,
that's what I thought. No, yeah. I'm saying I think Politico's doing themselves a little bit of a favor, but
like I don't even know how you stretch the definition to get to that. Like,
I know, right?
Yeah, I don't know.
But I do like. Clearly, he was launching veiled threats at Helms over JFK. I mean, that was definitely a part of it. But I think hanky panky was, you know what? It was the blackmail operations going on, and Helms was utilizing the same Columbia Plaza prostitution ring that, by the way, White House aide John Dean was also trying to flex and use because he had direct connections to it and knew about it as well. But too bad. He didn't know that it was a CIA operation. He didn't know that Richard Helms was using the same fucking prostitution network as him and his wife, which I think is just extraordinary, right? And incredible. And one of the major smoking guns for what truly happened, because John Dean, he's considered a hero of Watergate. He flipped prosecution witness. He felt like he was being immoral, and he had to basically undermine Nixon in order to one, prove his innocence, but more than that, it was that he felt it was immoral what they did. It's like he became the hero, he became the good guy, and he really benefited for the rest of his life based on that framework. And yeah, it's ridiculous to me, but Nixon and Helms, they they were at war, and so it was clearly a veiled threat when him talking about JFK to that. He's yelling, like it's not calm, when he's talking like this. And I know whenever Haldeman mentions Bay of Pigs, it's on apparently Helms, he freaked out. This one wasn't on a tape, right? But he like reacted very angrily at Haldeman when he brought up the Bay of Pigs thing and JFK. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But anyway, so on June 16th, 1972, right? Just hours before the Watergate burglars were caught, Nixon and Helms had a friendly phone conversation about his meeting with the president of Mexico. "He's on our side, all right," Nixon said. "Oh, that's great, Mr. President," Helms replied. 14 hours later, 5 burglars were arrested at the Watergate, and the tenuous bond between Nixon and Helms began to fray it was already framed. But Nixon, frantic to hide the burglars' ties to the White House, assumed his intelligence chief would help. In his memoir, The Ends of Power, Haldeman wrote that when he relayed Nixon's message about the Bay of Pigs, Helms exploded, shouting, "This has nothing to do with the Bay of Pigs." Haldeman reported back to Nixon that the gambit had worked and Helms had pledged to help with the FBI. And indeed, he had. Helms sent word to acting FBI Director L. Patrick Gray to taper off the investigation. But when Gray pushed back a few weeks later, Helms very easily acquiesced and the investigation continued. The director abandoned his defense of the president. So Helms opened his memoir, A Look Over My Shoulder, with an account of the June 23rd conversation. And he denied raising his voice and insisted Nixon's message about the Bay of Pigs was incoherent, which didn't explain his uncharacteristic loss of poise. Helms later told a CIA historian that the phrase had the devious, hard-nosed smell of a threat, which was more plausible. Mm-hmm. And Haldeman suggested that Nixon used the phrase, the whole Bay of Pigs thing, as a coded reference to the assassination of JFK. It was, he wrote, the president's way of reminding Helms, not so gently, of the cover-up of the CIA assassination attempts on the hero of the Bay of Pigs, Fidel Castro, a CIA operation that may have triggered the Kennedy tragedy, says Politico. So anyway, to finish this little part, Haldeman's interpretation of the whole Bay of Pigs thing was disputed by TV talk show host Chris Matthews. He dismissed the story, saying Haldeman's ghostwriter Joseph DeMona made up the JFK connection and put it in the book without Haldeman's knowledge. DeMona, however, completely denied Matthews' claims. He told documentary film producer Eric Hamburg that the book was all Haldeman's. And DeMona and Haldeman are both dead, but Tim Lipscomb, the editor-in-chief of Times Books, which published The Ends of Power, he's not dead. And so he says Bob Haldeman was a perfectionist and a control freak. He says this in an interview, Lipscomb. And he also says the idea that he didn't believe that he wrote about what he wrote about the Bay of Pigs and JFK's assassination is absolutely absurd. He completely believed it. We talked about it all the time, right? So I just think, come on, that's absolutely ridiculous. But we have to, of course he would bring that up. He knows what's in the skeletons in that closet. He was there. He was at the party in Dallas. So it's for anyone to be able to flex that, it would be Nixon,
It's even more beautiful that there were Bay of Pigs operatives involved in the robberies. So it's obviously Nixon didn't know that, but it's
right.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's part of why he got so upset, or Helms, because it's I don't know. Maybe you're fuck.
Yeah, dude.
He may have me by the balls a little bit there, but I'm not gonna let him know.
Right. And I think the funny thing is that I think the hard part is that Nixon himself was heavily involved and implicated in what happened in Op 40, not necessarily Bay of Pigs, but no doubt he played a role within the JFK assassination, but he knew where the bodies were buried, and that was a huge problem. And so I think that what it became was basically it was going to be the Nixon or the CIA. Somebody was going to have to take the fall, right? But the CIA had manufactured this crisis. Yeah. And so they had it entirely, at least as we mentioned before. I mean, in effect, the Houston plan was just an end around, right? I mean, for the FBI and its limitations, right? And as far as on the CIA and their domestic spying capabilities. And so, yeah, I think Moore Radford plays such a huge role because clearly they were spying on the White House at this time. And so again, that's mainly, I would say that's the reason, because that he set up this intelligence operation in the first place, because Hoover and Helms, they were at odds as well. Hoover had put a stop to all of this. And so it's just clearly that was the case, and so Woodward and Bernstein, their connections to intelligence, as well as Alexander Haig, it's such a revealing connection, man. Like, it really is. And that's why I think, like, it's of utmost importance that we understand the role of the media and how it the Mockingbird media of this time really set the official narrative for years to come, and it stands the test of time to this very day. I mean, I don't know really any normie who's questioning the reality of Watergate, right? As far as the reasons behind it. I mean, I think most people just expect that Nixon wanted to spy on political opponents to help him regain election, if they even know that much, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, but everyone basically worships Woodward and Bernstein as pillars of journalism, and they won the Nobel prize, and like it's just absolutely ridiculous, man. No, Pulitzer, I mean, not Nobel.
I mean, perfect examples I brought up earlier is like Trevor Aronson. Like, even within our circles, I feel like most people, you bring up Trevor Aronson, they're like, yeah, fucking Terror Factory, dope. Like, and you're like, but most people either didn't read it, and so they have only heard it from other people who refer to it as some sort of source to make their point, and don't realize the last chapter, like the last chapter. So it's like, or just didn't like. I mean, because if you didn't read that last chapter, like, you wouldn't I really feel like most of the framing is done in that. Like, it kind of snuck up on me, like how they framed it. I mean, maybe it's just because like people see it through their own prisms. So I'm not a normie, so I'm reading that book, listening to that book, whatever, and I'm like, oh, look in the last chapter, I'm like, what the fuck? But if you're just like a normie, you're like, okay, all right,
Right.
like, and so like, I don't know, but at the same time, though, I mean, I still, to some extent, have my part in creating that effect, because I've referred to it many times, because it's a great book, and so aside from that, like, I guess another good example is that most recent, I don't know if you've seen it yet, but there's been another OKC bombing documentary that dropped recently, and it does a similar thing. It drops a lot of great new stuff that wasn't really in the public consciousness before, like brings up Roger Moore, and goes
I
deeper
saw
into John Doe
Richard talking
2.
about it for sure.
And then it frames it. It kind of pulls a little bit of a Tubin, and how Tubin kind of, it's like, oh, look,
Dude.
these conservatives. It kind of pulls that, ties into J6, all that, and you're like,
funny.
fuck, dude. But you're like, but at the end of the day, you're like, pretty. If you're looking at it from our perspective, you're like, yeah, a lot of new good shit in there. So like, if you are referring to some sort of piece of media that's going to be, a higher production value, or that's more establishment or whatever, and you're trying to refer it to somebody, like, that's a good one to go to. But at the same time, you are kind of falling a little bit into that trap somewhat. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, as I think we talked about in our last Already Dead, I believe I did mention it's like, not all limited hangout. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but like,
Right.
I mean, but you still got to recognize that there is a little bit of, you do have to combat that framing that comes along with it. But
Definitely.
So, I mean, it is what it is. I mean, we work with what we got, so, but hey, I do think this is probably a good spot to kind of end it for this episode. We'll definitely have another one, because we didn't even hit what we were talking about hitting this episode, getting to like kind of the robberies and the specifics on that, which is fine. I'm glad we covered this, because this was kind of an area that I did want to go into, and the intrigue and like kind of the spy versus spy, executive branch versus its fucking its intel branch, and that type of stuff, which I do think it's kind of important to understand what's going on here, because it is confusing if you're looking for it, and you're like, why the fuck is this happening? You're like, so it is easy to just go, yeah, Nixon spying on people, I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah, but with that, let people know where they can find you at, and we'll go ahead and get out of here, man.
Cool, brother. Yeah, well, just so we have a good place to start for part 3. I'll finish this last little part on the Moore Radford. It's not long at all, and
Yeah,
we were almost done with it. But so in December 71, Nixon administration became concerned over a column written by Jack Anderson, that same journalist they were considering assassinating. And it was given the title U.S. Tilts to Pakistan. And it contained confidential information from classified documents regarding unofficial U.S. diplomatic policy in relation to Indo-Pakistani War of 71. And following the publication of the article, White House aides, led by John Ehrlichman, began an internal investigation into possible intelligence leaks. After an extensive investigation, which included administering polygraphs to those with access to the files, the investigation determined the source of the leak to be the Joint Chiefs of Staff Liaison Office to the National Security Council. The office was staffed primarily by Admiral Robert O. Wielander, who supervised the office, and Yeoman Charles Radford, who worked as a stenographer clerk. Now, Radford eventually admitted to having stolen classified documents from the National Security Council, which he took from briefcases and burn bags to be delivered to his superiors, Admiral Wielander and Admiral Rembrandt Robinson, who in turn delivered them to Thomas Moorer. He was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So that's how you get the name Moorer-Radford affair. And so Admiral Elmo Zumwalt, then Chief of Naval Operations, was also implicated as having involvement in this conspiracy, along with National Security Council staffer David Oscar Bowles. So anyway, a week after the publishing of Jack Anderson's article, Ehrlichman met with Nixon, Attorney General John Mitchell, and Chief of Staff Haldeman to discuss the outcome of the investigation. And the meeting was recorded by Nixon as part of the Nixon White House tapes. Now, during that meeting, Nixon voiced suspicion of Alexander Haig being involved and discussed prosecuting Admiral Moorer. Eventually, Nixon decided to cover up the affair on the advice of Attorney General John Mitchell, believing its revelation would hurt military morale and that ignoring it would cause the Joint Chiefs of Staff to be indebted to the president, thus increasing his control over the Pentagon. So that's basically what launched, this sort of apparatus within the White House, right? So I do think that it was a huge factor in Nixon feeling like he's surrounded on all ends and he basically can't trust anyone. And the only way that he can get any usable and workable intelligence is through his own channels. And that makes all the sense in the world to me, but also, and it also makes a lot of sense when we already covered the black bag operations, the Houston plan, all of this, the dynamic between FBI, CIA, and the White House at this time. It all fits just right, because then you realize that, like I said earlier, Helms found out through all of this, through the Houston plan failing. Yes, a few measures were implemented, not enough in his opinion. And so that was when I think he used his so highly secret Office of Security within the CIA, who only reported directly to him. I think that's when he says, okay, Howard, you're going to retire again, brother. You're going to go work for Mullen and Company. All right. Like that is what it seems like. And, James McCord, he was one and the same, so yep. There's no, to me, there's no question. Like it's just absolutely ridiculous. But yeah. Anyway, I think we're at a perfect stopping point, though. But
we're just going to say McCord. I'd say, guys, keep that name in mind, because that'll be, I think, one of the key names later.
Hell yeah, yeah.
Fuck. But yeah, we'll get into that in later episodes. I don't know if we'll really get into next episode. Probably the following one. Go ahead and let people know where they can find you. What new stuff you got. I know you got into some dark shit recently. It was a dope episode. By the way, I don't know if I told you this. I've now completely listened to everything in your catalog.
Are you serious? Thank you so much, brother. That means the world to me, dude. Seriously.
I recommend everyone do the same. So
I appreciate you, man. Jose, I love you, dude. Honestly.
Love you too, bud.
And you can find all my work at the Underclass Podcast. pretty much it's supported on all audio streaming platforms. You can support me at Patreon and Buzzsprout. I will have some legitimate incentives for you to join as a member within this week. I mean, by Tuesday, I'll have direct links to our Already Dead show sent out. So, if you're interested, if you find any of my work valuable in any way, or just feel free.
Do you
Do
know
what?
what the URL is for those off the top of your head?
For my Patreon?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's literally the Underclass Podcast at patreon.com. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And
All right.
same for Buzzsprout. It's the Underclass Podcast at Buzzsprout. And so, yeah, it's pretty easy to find. Just like I said, if anything I've ever done resonates with you, you feel like you want to just throw me a few bucks, feel free, man. Anything helps. I really appreciate it. But beyond that, yeah, Patreon, Buzzsprout, and I covered most recently was basically the Process Church of the Final Judgment, and it has a lot more to do with serial killers and satanic cult groups than most people would probably imagine. And there seem to be some real firm connections to some of the most infamous criminals in American history, and that alone is worth taking some time and exposing yourself to, because the official narratives just don't buy it anymore, everybody. But anyway, I appreciate you for having me on as always, brother.
Oh, no problem. And that with that does kind of go into our last episode already. We kind of talked about satanic hit squads or assassins, and seems to be that may have some connections with an apparatus of some sort that could work like that. Definitely goes into that a little bit. So I don't know. I think there's a little more credence to that than people think. For those who want to support me, it's patreon.com/NoWayJose2020. The lowest level is at $2, and that's where you can get the incentive to get the early episodes, just like I know you're doing as well. So you can get roughly about a week early. So this episode right here, if you're a patron, you're getting it a week early. If not, you're gonna wait. It is what it is. And then also I give out the StreamYard link from our live show we do every week on Tuesday, usually at 9:30, usually on Tuesday. Sometimes we have to change around for a guest. Generally speaking, the format we've been going for is just do a guest like every other week and then do me and you every other week. But it's a call-in show. So if you guys like these, and if you do have any questions about any of the series we've done or any of the content me or Austin have covered on our shows, feel free to listen in, join the live chat, because we also, in the second half of the show, we go into our call-in portion, which also includes just kind of interacting in the live chat. But you can call in, go in the live chat. If you have any good questions, we'll try to answer them. If you want to get on the Patreon, you can get that access to where you get a StreamYard link to where instead of doing a call-in, you can just come in like one of the talking heads like me or Austin is right now. And I also, my highest level of my patrons, those are my sponsors. I read them off every episode to give a shout out to them. I have my co-host on Tower Gang at Tower Gang Toad, and I have at Abrogate D's. I also have at ZOVERACK, at _Infinite Zeal. Then also my buddy Jacob Daniel of the Biblical Anarchy podcast. You can follow him at Biblical Anarchy. Then Tim Tuttle at John Klebold. I get a lot of good intros from him, a lot of good edits that I use for the show. Then also my buddy Will Bell of Rabbit Eye Wine. The shit's delicious. I highly recommend it. But only get like one bottle because you'll get carried away if you get more than one. With that, you guys want to follow me? It's at Tower Gang Jose. Like, share, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. And with that, we are out. We'll have another one of these for you guys here soon. Bye-bye.